Some journeys change you forever. I'll never forget driving a little black car across the Isle of Skye in Scotland. It was rainy and windy. I had bought a Dougie MacLean CD at Ilian Donnon's Castle's souvenir shop because the radio didn't work and CDs were still a thing back then. There weren't barely tourists on the island. In fact, there were hardly any cars and I drove alone almost the whole time. There were long-haired cows and sheep along the way. Lots of them. I remember the thrill, the goosebumps from that music in those breathtaking landscapes. Stopping the car at a lookout facing the sea and a meadow sprinkled with sheep. I stepped out into the rain to take a deep breath and etched that moment into my memory with all 5 senses. It was my first solo trip, and it was absolutely amazing. Many people, especially women, tell me they don't dare travel alone. That they'd like to, but they're scared. Or that they don't want to be alone all the time. I understand, because I've had those same fears and doubts too. In fact, I didn't travel alone until I was 30. I wanted to travel, but didn't have anyone to go with. It just so happened that at work they moved me to a different location. And I met a woman who had just come back from a month-long solo trip to Senegal. I felt absolute admiration for her courage. She said that traveling alone was transformative, and she encouraged me to start with something small at first, just a few days, just to try. And that if it felt like too much, I could always buy another ticket and come back. I bought my plane ticket to Scotland, eyes closed, scared out of my mind. And it turned out to be one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. There, I discovered that, in my opinion, traveling alone is the experience that makes you most aware of your own resources, some you didn't even know you had. And ironically, you set out alone, but end up realizing that solitude becomes a choice. These are 7 questions that came up for me that first time, and still come up today, but now I have a better idea of how to face them thanks to experience. I'm not going to lie, this is a real fear. I have to say that I'm not very adventurous. I mean, there are places I would never go alone, even less as a woman. Before choosing a destination, I gather as much information as I can about how safe the place is, the most common crimes, what other women travelers have to say. I am aware that there are things you just can't avoid, no matter what you do, and if something bad is going to happen, it will. But that's life, and it can happen just as easily on a trip as it can on the street where you live or even in your own house. But I do think that sometimes we associate the unknown with danger, when in reality, it's very possible that we are already living in places that are even more dangerous. We just don't see it because we are used to them. For example, Bali scared me before coming here. And now that I'm here, I feel much safer than in Barcelona. That doesn't mean I don't still take precautions and stay very aware of my surroundings. If safety while traveling alone is something you're interested in, let me know, and I'll create something to help you face that solo trip you want to make with more confidence. This is the most incredible thing of all. When you travel alone, it's so much easier for people to approach you and for you to make friends. But it's not just that. It's amazing how, when you really need connection, you're the one who makes it happen. On that first trip to Scotland, I discovered that for years I had seriously believed I wasn't a very social person and that I didn't connect easily. Turns out, I just hadn't been around the right people. There are lots of people who travel alone, And on every one of my trips, solitude has almost always ended up being a choice. I've been in Bali for a month and a half, and I haven't felt lonely for a single day. Traveling alone makes you responsible for every decision. That's both good and bad, of course. You're always the one choosing, and you have to respond to everything that happens. Every decision is yours alone. That gives you complete freedom to shape your days exactly how you want them to be. But it also means that your mistakes, your missteps, and your mishaps are all yours too. That can feel overwhelming to think about, but the truth is that in the moment, when you're actually faced with those situations, you end up developing new resources, forming new connections that help you, diving into local culture, collecting stories to tell later. This responsibility, this ability to come up with solutions, in the long run, gives you an incredible power and confidence in yourself, something very hard to get so quickly in any other situation. Some people are more impulsive. And then there's me. I like to think about things that might happen and have a survival plan in advance, just in case. A good travel insurance policy, having an internet connection as soon as you arrive in a new country, setting aside some emergency cash, getting the vaccines you might need. Before coming to Bali, I made a Google Drive folder with all my travel documents, the places I'd be staying, and some other details, and I'd shared it with 2 of my friends. That way, in case of an emergency, I have 2 people who know where I am, and I also have my documents all in one place. That being said, make sure you chose the right smart people, those who will react wisely if a real problem ever comes up. This section will be short. The people who think that have definitely never traveled alone and are projecting their own ignorance and fears onto you. And honestly, what does it matter what other people think? Hostels are great places to never be alone. And the truth is, it doesn't matter how old you are. I've met 60-year-olds with the spirit of a 30-year-old, truly fabulous people. And lately, I've crossed paths with people in their 20s while I'm 42, and that's been wonderful too. But it's true that for certain purposes, it might not be the right option. For example, in my case, wanting peace and time alone to think. Or maybe if you're just not up for sleeping in a bunk bed in a shared room surrounded most likely by 20-year-olds with lots of hormones. My first trips were to hostels. These last 2 trips have been more independent, and I've stayed in Airbnbs or bed and breakfast. As a tip, I try to choose places where other travelers' reviews says the vibe is very friendly, even homey, because in my experience, that guarantees a warm place and kind conversation whenever you need it. It doesn't matter how old you are. What matters is your spirit. There are many ways to travel, and if you're not too fussy about certain things, you can save a lot of money. Hostels with shared rooms usually have kitchens, and the local restaurants where locals eat are often much cheaper. You can also travel by exchanging work for accommodation and food, like I did in Ireland and Scotland last time. Obviously, if your ideal way of traveling is staying in spotless resorts and eating at fancy restaurants every day, that requires a lot of money. But in my opinion, that's going on vacation, not traveling. If, like me, you don't mind if geckos come into your room, if there are ants in the bathroom, and if Joe wakes you up when he feels like singing, it's cheaper. But the peace of mind I get knowing that if something happens, I can call Sammy and he'll help me, that's priceless. On these last trips, I realized it was a mistake to stop traveling alone when I was in a relationship. Mostly because for me, traveling helps me reconnect with myself and open my mind. It makes me stronger and fuels my creativity. If at any moment you've wondered about it, if you've watched this video all the way to the end, asking yourself whether you should give it a try, my message to you is yes, do it. because the moment you try it, you'll definitely want to do it again. I'd love to know if you ever travel alone and how your experience was. Or, on the other hand, if you're dying to try but haven't dared yet, what are the biggest doubts holding you back from buying that ticket? Where would you go tomorrow if you had no worries or fears? Thank you again for your love and support, for collaborating with this live project by buying the bookmark on Ko-fi, and for being here. Take care, and I'll see you next week. Goodbye.